Up those of you who thought this was what gender is all about, male and female. Well, I'm sorry, but it appears that you're now wrong. If you wish to define your gender on Facebook now, it offers you 58, yes, 58 options. You can be gender fluid, transsexual, transgender, bigender, polygender, hermaphrodite, intersex, gender queer, gender variant, gender neutral, and quite a few others, and oh yes, you can be male or female. And I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't know what most of them mean either. And I'm sufficiently long in the tooth to look at them and think, good grief, the world's gone mad. However, I do understand that they're telling us something important about the confusion that's around today, and perhaps about the determination that many people have to free themselves from stereotypes and limitations. So I think we should take them seriously, but I'm afraid that I simply don't understand that much to talk about it very much today. So that's not the main topic of my talk today. On the other hand, I don't want to just talk about gender just in terms that the inclusive church resources cover, because that's pretty much about the role of women, and particularly about the role of women in the church. And I won't say that that battle's been entirely won. It still rumbles on in some quarters, but the balance has shifted a long way in the right direction. 27% of our paid clergy are now women, and 51% of non-stipendiary priests. So the church certainly can't do without us women, can it? And also the number of women in senior roles is now rising. The first female diocesan bishop was appointed in 2015. And I'm particularly pleased about this one, Christine Hardman, who's now Bishop of Newcastle, because she was previously an archdeacon in Southwark, and she was my line manager for a while when I worked for the diocese, and she was absolutely excellent. So there's still a way to go, but I don't think that perhaps the case for women in leadership need be argued very much further, at least in the Church of England. Not that there isn't a lot further to go in other areas. 93% of executive directors in the UK are male. 78% of newspaper articles in the UK were written by men. On the BBC Today programme, 84% of reporters and interviewees were men. 77% of our parliament is male, and 80% of parliamentarians across the world. So there's still a lot of inequality out there, and still a lot of wider battles to be fought. But within this church, at least, I would say that we're very happy with our woman vicar, and we seem to be very happy with other women leading. It isn't a major issue. In fact, there's an argument that we might have gone too far the other way, because the number of proportion, at least, of men in our church seems to be dropping. And I don't feel qualified to discuss this one either. But just to throw out something here for you to discuss, here's a quote from a guy called David Murrow, who's written a book called Why Men Hate Going to Church. He says, "Men and young adults are drawn to risk, challenge, and adventure, but these things are discouraged in the local church. Instead, most congregations offer a safe, nurturing community, an oasis of stability and predictability. And studies show that women and seniors gravitate towards these things." He says it's hard for a man to be real in church because he must squeeze himself into this feminine religious mould. Discuss, but not now. After the service, perhaps. It would be very useful to know what you think. I think he might be just tapping in a few more stereotypes there, but it would be useful to know what you think, especially what the men here think. However, even that's not what I really want to talk about. Perhaps we ought to step back and define exactly what we're talking about when we refer to gender. Basically, sex refers to the biological and physiological characteristics that we have. And gender refers to the roles that we play, roles that are constructed by the society we live in. So if you like, our sex is whether we use the urinal or not, and our gender is whether or not we wear a skirt. Although very many of us don't wear a skirt from 1 month to the next, but the stereotype is still there. So gender refers to our identity, what people see when they look at us. And it also has a lot to do with stereotypes, the superficial definitions that others put on us, or that we put on others. I wonder if any of you saw a BBC interview the other week with Professor Robert Kelly, who is an East Asia expert. For a while, it became an internet sensation, going viral and watched by millions. Have a look.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children's just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year.
At first, it was just something funny, but it soon provoked an aggressive debate, because when people first saw it and tweeted about it, they all referred to the woman who came in as the nanny. But she wasn't, she was Kelly's wife. And that provoked writers to point out what a sexist, ageist, and racist assumption many people had made. She was Asian, she appeared subservient, therefore she must be the nanny. People instantly labelled her and assumed a stereotype without even noticing that they were doing it. Of course, we're also sometimes inclined to label ourselves. If I wanted to define myself, I could do it in many different ways. I'm white, I'm British, I'm female, I'm middle class, I'm a Londoner, I'm a writer, I'm religious, I'm a wife, a mother, a grandma, I'm obese. Yes, folks, it's official, technically I am. But I very much hope that those of you who know me well don't just see me as any of those identities, or indeed the sum of all of them, because inside I feel that there's rather more to me than that. In our second reading today, when the disciples returned and saw Jesus talking to the woman, they were surprised, at least. You get the impression they were shocked. Why was that? Well, first, simply because she was a woman, she was a second-class citizen, she was off limits, she was someone else's property. And secondly, because she was a member of a hated, hostile tribe. And thirdly, they probably looked at her and summed her up as someone who was no better than she should be. Perhaps it was her dress, her posture, perhaps simply the fact that she was there alone at midday. Why hadn't she gone to the well with all the other women earlier in the day? Could it be that she was a bit of an outcast? But for Jesus, although he saw all these things, they weren't all that he saw. For a start, he seemed to know about her marital history. And when she went back to the village, she told her neighbours, "Come, see this man who told me everything I ever did." How did Jesus do this? Was it some clever Sherlock-like analytical intelligence? Was he omniscient? Did he know everything? Well, I don't think he knew everything, because at this point in his earthly life, we're told that he was fully human, and no one fully human does know everything. Nevertheless, he did see clearly way below the surface. He saw something in people that others didn't see. The Gospels don't always spell this out, but I get the impression that he had this insight with everyone he met. When he saw Zacchaeus, he didn't just see a tax collector, an enemy collaborator, or a bribe taker. And when he saw Peter, he didn't just see a rough, impulsive fisherman. When he saw lepers, he didn't just see the deformities and the ulcerous sores. With all these people, as with the woman, he saw something more. He saw the memories, the wounds, the yearnings. He saw the beautiful soul that once had been and could be once more. Another bit of news with the BBC connection, some of you may have seen this one. Jenny Murray, presenter of Woman's Hour, recently wrote an article in The Times that created a storm of disapproval. Basically, whilst affirming the right of transgender people to be treated with respect, she queried the idea that someone who was transgender could actually be described as a real man or a real woman. She referred to an interview that she'd done some years earlier with a vicar called Carol Stone, who had actually, before reassignment surgery, been the Reverend Peter Stone. She'd been rather angered at Carol's preoccupation with what to wear, and her apparent ignorance of the fact that as Peter, she'd become a vicar as a matter of course, at a time when women were still fighting for the right to become ordained. And she pointed out that whatever identity you take on, the real you is still the sum of all your experiences and all your memories. You can't wipe the slate clean. And on that, I agree with her. In our first reading, the beautiful Psalm 139, the writer speaks of how amazing it is that God knows us fully. He sees us fully. He is with us fully all the time. And again, it affirms that to God, we're so much more than our labels, our stereotypes, and our surface identities. God knows the very deepest things about our identities, things we don't even know about ourselves, and loves us just the same. There's something very scary about being known that well, about not being able to hide anything. But when you realize that God's gaze towards us is always one of love, then it can also be deeply liberating. But our theme is inclusivity, so how does this apply? Well, there's a very simple message that I hope we'll all take away with you. It's a prayer, and it's this: Lord, help me to see others as you see them. Help me to see beyond the labels, beyond the stereotypes, beyond roles and definitions. Help me to see the real person, someone you deeply love. Amen.